now.
Okay. Let's should I put the agenda up in the shared window?
This is the June 13th, 2019 Governance Working Group. And Rich Jensen is guiding, and you're going to share the agenda?
Yeah, let me put it on my, share it from here somewhere. There it is, I think. Share. So I just wanted to make a comment as to how we got to this place. You know, basically in conversation with Ian Bloom and following Nick Mains's retirement from the chair, the co-op at this time does not have a chartered governance committee. Coming out of the special meeting process in April, I was just catching us up to how we got to this place. Following the special meeting process in April, I was drafted by the folks in that process to try to get, among other things, get the government process started and chartered again. So I was, since it was not as a governance committee, we've called it a working group. And most recently, I offered to facilitate this meeting again if more than 5 members in the governance channel gave their positive sentiment, and 7 people did. So I made sure that those people were invited. And I think really at this point, based on what I observed in the member meeting on Wednesday, and just wanting to get us going forward, I think getting this committee properly chartered is really the priority of business. So I wanted, so following the agenda items, let's see if I can, how do I scroll? This is the challenge. Let's see, how do I escape? Okay, there we go. Okay, there we go. So I think everyone here knows each other, is that correct? Except for, who do we have in V?
That's me, Rao.
Oh, hi there, Rao. Okay, now I see you.
Yeah, my camera is having trouble, but
okay, no problem. You were able to see the agenda that I put together?
Yes, I see that.
Okay.
I'm fine with viewing everything. It's just my projecting the video is not working, but I'll look at it.
Good. So I thought we just run through the agenda, because I suggested this for consideration by whomever turned up today. I think we've got a scribe. Thank you, Gary. We have, I think we all know each other. Item 4, review the agenda. So if there's anything here that I think is a burning issue for anyone, just shout it out and let's get it, let's include it here. But this was my suggestion for drafting the governance committee nomination process. And again, I'm trying to sort of synthesize opinions that I've seen in the Discord governance group and things that have been expressed in our various working group meetings and so forth in the last 2 months. The suggested qualification is that the person for being seated in the committee would be someone who is a member who's willing to contribute 3 hours per week in support of the committee activities. I want to suggest that the term that we seat this committee would be through the board meeting after the annual meeting. So we would go through the annual meeting, and perhaps as a part of the annual meetings, there'd be an opportunity to seat other governance committee members. Anyway, we would work that out, but there'd be some commitment. That was what I wanted to offer. We can discuss it later. I'm just going to run through these items. So I wanted to suggest to the people that came today, if we would add names to a list of folks to nominate to be seated. I was going to suggest that that this group, through some of the means that have come out of the last 2 months, there's a phone tree that was started. There's a community contact list that Jim showed in the member meeting. But basically from this meeting to next week at the same time, we get the outreach to folks. Just make sure that the message gets out that the governance meeting is being rechartered, and we're looking for folks to be seated. In the current draft document that we'll see in a moment, it suggested that the committee have a minimum of 5 members and a maximum of 9. So if we have qualified individuals willing to be nominated and we have more than 9 of them, then perhaps next week we have a process by which we have some ballot or a conversation, and we arrive at 9 members for passing on to the board for chartering. And then I also, my item there suggestion was that that out of that group, they would select a chair nominee. Then for today's meeting in the next 45 minutes, to look at the governance committee draft charter that's been floating around. It's actually, it has revisions in it from the charter of the previous governance committee that was passed under the guidance of Kenny Rowe, and that had Nick Maines as a member sponsor. So anyway, we'd look at that. Other items we might look at, if there's time, would be, Jim had a proposal for a Discord group, started with a couple of people, and we could expand that. There also is the phone tree that came out of the special meeting process in May that's got about 100 names. Those are that's from the Discord channel, the 102 or more members that supported Dan Connolly's special meeting process. So we have those member tags that we could use as a communication phone tree, and certain members have already volunteered to do outreach through that tool. And then looks like Jim can speak to the member introduction form sheet. And then I suggest that we, 5 minutes before closing, we review any particular action items, and then we go. So that's it looks like Jim or someone already got into add a potential item. Are there any other items that should be added before we proceed? And does this order seem like the proper order? Just maybe get sentiment on some of these particular items. Is there any comment, or I think
it's right that we do first things first. I mean, we have to set up the committee.
Yeah.
If we get through that part of it, then we can get to the lower items in more detail.
Any other comments from anybody?
Yeah, I was wondering, so does it look like we'll get 5 members, if that's the goal, minimum of 5?
I can answer that, or anybody else want to answer that? Yeah, I'm confident that we would.
Okay.
There were 6 or 7 people that posted in the Discord channel that they were willing to support the governance committee.
Okay, and then the other question I have is,
and I should say, I don't think we've had. I know I haven't been able to organize effective outreach to, the 100 interested members from the special meeting process, for example.
When we look in the charter document, you see there's currently 6 members listed.
Okay.
Okay, which we can get consent on from here, and maybe see if there's any other nominees to go here who are willing to serve.
So let me pull that item up on the screen. Let's see if we're going in the proper order here.
Okay, we are recording.
Yeah. So these are the names that were mentioned.
At one point, we did decide that the recordings would be put in the Google Drive, which is accessible only to members in the RChain Google groups. I think at the last meeting, I was unable to do that. I don't know why, and I put up the video unlisted. I will once again try to put it on our drive, but we do have some space limitations and things on the Google Drive that may make it necessary to put it up unlisted on YouTube. Does anyone here have an objection to that? Or comment about it?
Well, it's cheap enough to extend the space on the Google Drive, I think, right? They charge what, $15 or $10 for 15 gig or something like that. I don't remember.
I'm paying for 100 gig, which is running out.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, I guess you need to archive stuff out. But anyway, in this list, seems like Dan Salkov is there twice in that
Oh,
thing.
that's a good point.
The other thing I was wondering relative to this is we're just focusing on the governance committee now, and we do need to get other committees also going, at least with a couple of members willing to do the work in the nomination and the audit committees and all that. So is the thinking here that this is all committees together? Is these volunteers, or do we have additional volunteers, or perhaps the same people volunteering for the other committees? Because I'm trying to get a holistic picture so that by October we get through everything we need to get through in terms of actually getting board members through.
I've begun to compile a list of all these things. As it is immediately, the governance committee doesn't exist. And it's a prerequisite to everything else. In a sense, I think the sentiment is that the governance committee is sort of acting as everything. And as it spins off committees, the memberships will change.
Yeah, I think we should have a minute to be looking in more detail through the charter. The charter provides, I think, some language regarding the governance committee's relation to the other committees. So I think that if we could just focus on getting the governance committee started and an effective process that the board can recognize and other members can recognize, then we'll have some basis for expanding governance functions.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, the reason I'm basically bringing that up is given the amount of work that needs to be done with the 5 minimum, if we commit them all to governance and those are the only folks available to do anything, we still need to also do the work of the other companies. That's the reason why I was bringing it up. Hello, Bill. We haven't lately seen each other, but we had met before. Bill Swam. This is Rao. You're muted.
You're muted, Bill.
Sorry, my son was emptying the dishwasher earlier. So, but nice to see you again, Rao.
Yeah, same here. All right, so go ahead. I guess you want to review the charter and the scope so that we can complete the processing of this, Rich? Is that what you were suggesting?
Yeah, and well, we were talking about the number of members, so I wanted to gather that information point. And you're right. At this point, we have 4 identified. Dror, I believe, is his tag is not listed there because I'm not exactly sure the reason. I know just from speaking with him, he at different times has you know, has other time commitments. So we could explore him. But at this moment, we have 4 people who I'm quite confident that all of those 4 have are willing to make the commitment and sit on the committee. Now we have other people listed who offered to volunteer at least 3 hours. You know, Bill is among them. Gary is among them. Ian is among them. I'm not sure whether those are issues about, you know, would there be issues about the makeup as to whether staff could or could not be on the committee? If anyone wants to speak to that.
Well, I'll just share that that's a little bit of where my thoughts were at, is to not, I don't want to instill any potential conflict of interest kind of matters into things. I want as my role, particularly with human resources, integrates with the governance committee, I want to make sure that, you know, there's clear divisions where there needs to be divisions, and I just don't want to create something, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Well, okay, ordinarily there would be a board member on the committee, and that's certainly but I understand as an employee, it's a little bit different. I don't.
Is Nick Means, I mean, granted, he doesn't want to lead it up anymore, but is he not wanting to be involved at all? Because he certainly had a lot of, he was contributing pretty well there for a while.
I think a number of people like Nick and Dan Connolly and some others, they have conditions. They want to see us institute some changes before they engage. They don't want to beat their heads against the wall anymore.
I see.
Yeah, I mean, let me put it this way. Nick let it be known that he was not available to work with the committee anymore several weeks ago, and hasn't changed his condition. So I guess even though we have only 4 identified here, I'm confident that with some outreach, we can come up with a 5th. And my thinking was, and maybe Jim, you had a greater expectation for what we'd accomplish in this meeting, but I just thought if we could be steering toward getting this resolved next week, we're still in a good kind of queued up, and especially if we get the endorsement of a board member, we're queued up to get this ratified by the board at their next meeting.
I know Steve Talbert Ross has been very supportive and I guess very busy. He did hope to be involved with us to a greater extent than he has been.
Yeah.
A number of us have met with him privately, so we're still pretty well connected with Steve Talbot Ross, and maybe we should put his name on here as an advisor or something.
I guess I'm not too comfortable putting people's names on without their contributing.
That's true.
But I've been in conversation with
work on this with us. He hasn't had the opportunity to do that, and maybe before next week, maybe we can get Steve to work on this with us. We can put that in the action items.
Yeah, I think that there are a couple things here, but I do agree that from Steve, definitely we had support from before and also recently. There was verbal commitment to support, but he is also extremely busy. So I think Steve would be a resource for us to take things to. And relating to what Jim was saying earlier, that there needs to be a board member on it, I think it's the other way around. The committee chair would be an observer on the board is how I think the rules are written up right now. So it's not like we have to take an existing board member to be on the governance committee, but more that whoever is the governance chair would have a role as VP of governance observer in the board. That's how I understand it.
Okay.
But Steve is a resource on the board for us to get things presented, and we do have a verbal commitment from him that he'll support that. So
The current resolution of the board says that the VP of governance will chair the governance committee.
correct. So if we elect a chair, then the board can decide whether they want that person to be VP of governance or not. I mean, you know, I guess they have the ability to reject the chair.
Right. And they also have the ability to change the resolution.
Yes.
Yeah, so I agree. When we were having the governance process, I was, Steve, I've talked to Steve more recently, and yes, he is very supportive, at least in his expressions to me about this process. I think he's making certain decisions about his time commitments. He had some changes on his end in his life, so he's navigating those. I would also say that Evan Jensen was quite supportive in one of the working group sessions as well. I think I guess I to turn this into action. I can commit to. Well, who wants to commit to getting to Steve, and who wants to commit to getting to Evan? Does anybody want to volunteer?
I can do that.
Which one will you choose?
Steve Ross Talbot.
Okay. Bill will reach out to Steve with getting his support. Are you clear on what you're going to be asking?
That's just what I wanted to clarify. We're asking for his support as a board member.
Yes.
We're not asking for him to assume a seat.
I think he could be as involved. Personally, I think he could be as involved as he wishes to be.
I think we want to arrange with him to review the charter and maybe sign on as an advisor or some other capacity that's comfortable with.
I think the main thing also is endorsing, kind of previewing an endorsement for the ratification of the charter at the next board meeting.
Right, and submitting it to the board.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And so the minimum ask is, Steve, will you review this charter? Is it ready to go? Will you present it and support its ratification at the board? Right. And I can do the same for Evan. Okay. All right.
Yep.
Unless somebody else wants to take Evan on.
When do we want to do that by?
I'm thinking by this time next week, so that we can be proceeding. What I'm imagining is we come out of this meeting today, we shake the bushes for who wants to be involved in governance, steering folks toward next week, or at least nominating themselves by next week, and we get this document resolved to a finalized form, so that then as we reconvene a week from now, we've got something we can say is finished and proceed with a group of nominated committee members. That'd be my goal. How do people feel about that?
That sounds good to me. I think whoever the fifth person is has to review this, and then the two board members, Evan and Steve, need to review this, and then I guess we'll be good to go.
So let's look at this document for the next 20 minutes or so. So this is, the history of this document is that I believe Nick Maines and Kenny developed it, and it was the charter that was ratified in, I think, December or January, which then was the basis of the governance committee that met until I think it only met about 6 or 7 times before there were certain departures and so forth. So there's very little that's changed, but there are some comments and amendments that are coming through. So I thought we should look at those. So purpose and objectives, the governance committee team, called the team, will provide advisory oversight of RChain cooperative governance, the organizing structure and processes of decision-making, ensure that governance design and practice reflects and balances co-op member voice, executive representative leadership, expert engagement, design for effective and decentralized governments in line with co-op values and principles, provide planning and coordination of major governance change, support the co-op and its functions, and members with appropriate guidance and recommended tools where appropriate. Does someone else want to read the next section? And I'll
Rich,
follow along with the screen.
first of all, were there any changes from what you just read from the previous
No,
version?
nope.
All the changes are in the markup as suggested edits.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's exactly in place. So there's
there
no
is a
change thus far at all.
I'll say that there was there are a couple of notes along the way, and then someone who was not identified, but someone suggested the removal of a lot of the appendices. So that's in the bottom. So for that reason, like Appendix A1 is removed in a version of the draft. So that would affect this regarding terms, this footnote at the bottom of the page. You following me?
Mm-hmm.
Which is, governance committee charter. So we'll get down there. I think it's important to read along so we get what all the processes are, unless everyone feels this is a waste of our time.
No, I think this is important. If we're going to then go out and try and find others that may want to join or be in any spot to speak about what's in the contents.
Yeah. Does someone want to read from Scope and Constraints?
I'll do it.
Someone. Okay, thank you.
The role of the team is constrained to providing the minimum necessary overarching design and coordination in order to maximize innovation, independence, and self-reliance of the functions, domains that make up the co-op. It is concerned with the end-to-end effectiveness and efficiency of processes, including their measurement, rather than the design of governance for any or all competent elements or functions of the co-op. The team will be guided by the co-op values and ICA-based principles, which are agreed independently by the membership.
Do we need to go down into those? Those are, let's see where those go. So there is a co-op value statement. We've got Ian on the call now. He may know where this comes from.
Yeah, this is the ICA.
Okay.
Cooperatives and principles, and then the values, and then the results of our survey from the governance group previously.
So this is basically a reference to legacy values that RChain has held from its foundation, from its formation, and are consistent with ICA values generally regarding co-ops.
This was a result of a rank ordering done by previous governance group that was offered to the membership for feedback, and this was the ordering that they gave.
Now, if we go back to the main document, just about the reference to these principles, there was something about the end-to-end effectiveness and efficiency rather than the design of governance for any and all component elements. So is it saying that basically the individual pieces like audit or nominating committee or whoever will make up their own processes, and that the role of governance is not to necessarily detail those, but just to make sure that they're all working together and effective? Is that what we're saying here? Or?
We should be saying that. I mean, we have the decentralization as a core principle. So each of these groups should organize their own processes. Now, we can make recommendations, but not dictate.
So, but is that how everybody understands that sentence?
I had a hard time while I was reading the paragraph, and I was actually going to ask, if someone can simplify exactly what that is saying.
And I'm following the footnote in the page down to functions. It says the specialist and expert operational domains, departments, teams, bodies that make up the explicit organization structure of the co-op. So that seems congruent to your statement, Rao. That, yeah, the governance committee seems to be directed here toward a kind of a high level generalization rather than intervening in component processes, component elements or functions.
I think the governance committee's remit is to help create the charters for these other committees. First, it needs a charter itself.
Yeah, I think Greg expects us to be active in helping these committees to form. Right.
Ian, do you know if there is a specific, we can keep reading along and perhaps we'll find specific language that, I think that's in the relation to other bodies language that I think is coming up.
What's the question?
If the remit let's just scroll down, the remit that you described is made explicit in the text here somewhere.
Well, I would refer to the board minutes regarding the governance committee, because whatever charter we can come up with, it's going to have to pass muster with the board and get signed off.
Well, my understanding is this is the charter document that was signed off.
No.
You don't think it is? Are we mistaken about that?
Correct. I mean, no, it was not signed off. No.
I thought this was the charter. This is the chart. I mean, I'm happy to be corrected, but this is the charter that Nick was referring to. That
yeah, it's
Kenny and Nick in it. I thought this. So isn't that the basis upon which the governance committee was originally chartered?
Dan had stated that this was, without the proposed changes that we put in here, that this was the document that was approved by the.
Where's that approval? So just look to the board minutes. I believe Evan, as secretary, wrote it up. What was it? I think, if I remember, maybe December 4th. So I think
think
these
that's
minutes
the
were,
origination of this document, but let's.
well,
So,
the history,
Ian,
here, yeah.
Well, I guess I got two questions. So was there a charter for the governance committee that was signed?
No.
So, okay, so there,
Oh,
maybe got to a point, but it was never signed.
Right. Yeah. So December, I think it was December 4th board meeting. The board resolved that such a committee should be created, that it should be head up by the VP of governance, who was Kenny Rowe at the time, and that the charter would be finished by the next board meeting. And that never happened. So next board meeting came and went, and we never got any finalization of the charter. But this was what we're looking at, or some previous history of it, was definitely the draft that was submitted to the board for that December 4th meeting.
so the governance committee meetings that Nick was convening in January were unchartered?
So I'm saying that the charter was not ratified by the board. So I mean, we can look
Okay.
exactly what Evan as secretary recorded. I think it was pretty close though.
So this document, this is even though it's been cited as the charter, it's more a proposed charter.
Yeah, I think so.
Charter. Okay. So I'm not, okay, well that changes things, because I thought we had some efficiency built in because we had a document that had been previously approved. It's good to know that, because I don't know so what you're saying is there are board minutes from December 4 with particular items regarding the remit of the committee that may not be included in here, because I don't remember exactly seeing the other members, or the other, let's see, key stakeholders. That's where there is some mention of other committees.
Okay. So I'm looking at the board minutes now. I put them in I think it was last week. There was some discussion of this. I copied it into Discord as well.
Can you copy the link here into the chat?
Yeah, drop it into the chat.
The other thing I was going to say was, I thought Steve Ross Talbert, did he not present this to the board in the past one of the recent meetings or something?
Well, there's another document called GP001,
Mm-hmm.
which has its own history.
Right. So, but he presented that, but not this. Is the where you're going with that?
Yeah. Can I'm on the cell phone right now. On the laptop, I'm looking at the December 4th minutes, which you can just get through from the GitHub board repository. But it says Kenny Rowe, this is the resolution. So Kenny Rowe made a motion to establish the governance committee with the understanding that the committee membership and charter would be defined by the next board meeting on January 1st. So what I'm saying is the board resolved to establish the committee, understanding that the charter and its membership would be ratified January 1st. January 1st didn't happen. It wasn't on the board's, the board didn't do anything with it January 1st.
Okay.
So just sitting in the board meetings, and including the most recent one, which the minutes are not yet available for. So there was a board meeting last Tuesday. Those minutes are up and signed by the secretary. There was a special board meeting this past Tuesday, mostly regarding the sale of rock this quarter. But there was discussion in that board meeting about governance, and Steve Ross Talbert kind of took the lead there in saying that that he would help work with those people participating in governance or governance working group to help get this nailed down by the next board meeting. So I mean, getting a proper charter up. But the charter should outline, the function of the committee, its membership, how that membership is selected, and the processes for how it functions. And in the governance of the co-op in general, it's like how to. We're looking at how to share power of the cooperative. Right now, it's very much focused in the board and the president. So I'm zooming out too far.
Let's also, I don't want to waste folks' time. This is very helpful, obviously very important information. Ian, thank you for bringing it to the group. There is, okay, we do have some language here about team interfaces. The team will receive request commissions to review, develop, draft, revise, or oversee governance policies and practices. These may be amendments to clarify or improve existing processes or languages. Executive functions domains, the team will mutually broker. There's this RChain chart I'm just not seeing any particular language here about governance being the kind of originary source for other groups. Let's see.
No, that was verbal from
From the beginning.
No, and that's fine. It's just if it's not here, we need to write it in. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and if I can channel Evan a little bit. So our board member, Evan Jensen, I remember he was on a call, I guess it was a couple weeks ago, and what he was requesting of this committee and of the membership in general was, I think Evan and Steve Ross Talbert were both on the call, and they were asking for some group or committee that could interface between the membership and the board and could help put together proper proposals that the board could vote on. So Evan was critical of some of the proposals that have come in the past that were not well put together, and that the board couldn't just simply do a yes or no vote on. So helping to package the proposals.
Yeah, we were sort of led to believe, I think Dan said this was a true copy of what the board had reviewed or accepted. And so we were sort of saying this would, we would just minimally modify this. And I think, if providing design and effective, efficient, decentralized governance, well, that's the board, committees, working groups. I mean, this is, we're supposed to design that. I think that's already included in here. To provide the, to be an interface between the board and the community. I don't know that it's in here specifically.
Yeah, I think I agree, Jim. That sounds too broad. I think this, or Nick was envisioning this committee as being kind of a bootstrap committee to help create the co-op's governance. To create the policies and procedures and charters by which the governance functions through the committees and the board and processes.
Yes. So I guess I want to marry the sentiment that you're expressing
Next.
from from what, from the meeting that several of us attended, where we had Steve and Evan, and then we also had Kenny in the room, et cetera. So that's been the nature of the working group. Maybe I was fooled because there had been something called governance committee, and as this process had caught together, there is a landscape. All of this is all a considerable amount of work that was all put together, that references the landscape document, and in the landscape document we have this charter document was cited. So I think we're pretty darn close. And I think this group of people chattering today, I mean that with the greatest amount of respect, is the right, we're the right group of members that are trying to follow through this process and follow due diligence and transparency, so that we can meet the request that you and Evan, Steve and Evan spoke to. And I can only imagine, again, because of the nature of the conversations that we've had with Steve Ross Talbot, that this is, that we're doing legitimate work here to look at this document and see, if this is 95% of what is needed, then as we broadcast to the rest of the membership, I'm optimistic that we can close the last 5%.
Yeah, I think so. I think this document was almost there. It was just not brought up in the January meeting.
Right.
Yeah, but I think it raises a couple of questions though. One is, I think per Evan's comment, this would not be a proposal they would look at and say, we approve in a board thing, because it will probably call for a full meeting discussion just to understand what is being said in this document, and any questions that might arise in their mind as to, does this apply, does that not apply, that kind of a thing. So I think this document, even if Steve Ross Talbert presents it,
yeah,
I would imagine would have difficulty getting a yea or nay vote, unless they just choose to say, well, unless they choose to trust that the committee has done good work, we'll just trust them and say, just go ahead and vote on it. But I would think in terms of actually processing this, they'll need a little bit of time, questions back and forth. That's one thing I think.
Yeah, I agree, Rao, and maybe sending drafts or updates to the board members to help keep them plugged in, so it doesn't just land in a board meeting and they have to spend the whole meeting discussing it.
Yeah, I think maybe what we should do is not send the drafts and then give them an opportunity for Q&A, and then take their feedback, see if there's any modifications needed, put them in, and then present it for voting subsequently. So I think it's not a single step, but a 3-4 step process is how I'm thinking they would be comfortable voting on something like this. So that's one point. The other point I want to make is the governance committee is under the executive committee, which is under the board. So the question is, who is responsible for governance on the board?
No, Rob, that's not right. So
okay.
The governance committee was not part of the original formation of the cooperative. It wasn't one of the required committees for the governance. It was created. It was really Nick Main's idea, and supported by Kenny. And Kenny actually became the vice president of governance. So in the board resolution, December 4th, that calls for the creation of the governance committee, it mandates that the vice president of governance should serve on the governance committee and be a board observer. So even if the VP of governance is not a board member, they must be allowed to observe in board meetings. So that's resolved.
Right, but the thing is though, even assuming that is in place, you have to look at the co-op overall and say, who is responsible for governance? Typically that would be at the COO level. to be able to say, because it's one thing for us to do the work and have an observer on the board versus holding the board accountable to governance. Like if there is some bad governance going on, the observer sitting on the board, what are they going to do? They're going to come back and tell the company that we don't agree with this. But is there somebody needs to be responsible for governance at the board, that is part of the board that has the authority and the responsibility to the whole co-op, right?
So I agree, having the VP of governance actually be a board member is stronger. But
right. And then, I mean, somebody else, I guess we're basically going to say, are we going to say that the idea is that if the governance committee or VP of governance, whoever, came out and said, this is what the governance committee reported or recommended or whatever, and the board did not really follow through and did their own thing, then what?
My view at this point is that, we're setting something up in an advisory committee to design the governance.
Right.
And we're going to come up with all the details of how to do it properly today, and solving problems that we may or may not have.
Yeah, Raoul's describing something with teeth.
Our time right now.
Am I right, Raoul? That you're asking, what teeth does this committee have? And Jim is reminding us that it was that the idea is that it's an advisory committee.
Right. Yeah. So what this unless we are, I guess, unless the assumption here is that the entire board is responsible for governance, and that if they don't follow, it's their problem, so to speak, and that we are just advisors. We take the issues, we report back on what has not been approved and what was not agreed to, and so on and so forth. And that may be fine. Maybe that is the answer, that the entire board is responsible for the governance, and we leave it at that. I don't know. Is everybody comfortable with that, though, that distinction?
I added a line under the members that additional members are added or removed by a weak consensus of the existing members. I think there we could add a recommendation about a VP of governance or something else without making it a requirement to get this thing going. Because I think that will just delay things further.
Well, I want to make one more comment about the institutional memory, and I think we are, even though it's rather daunting and confusing, I think we're untangling the knot here.
Right.
But I want to add one other thread that's in the mix, which is that there is this governance document GP001, which which is more comprehensive, and I apparently had the wrong idea. I thought that we had a charter that lapsed, and it was just a matter of relaunching the charter. And then GP001 has greater context about, speaks to governance. Now, so I was kind of looking at that as a two-stage rocket. So get the governance committee formed, and then GP001 is, my understanding, is a set of governance principles derived from the item of business 4 about how to determine what the purview of governance is. So that was going to be the second stage of the rocket. Now, the fact of the matter is that the second stage of the rocket was provided to the board and reviewed by the board and was on the agenda, I think, in February. But at that time, Steve Ross Talbert pulled it off because he hadn't read it.
Yeah.
So anyway, we have quite a bit of governance engagement. We aren't just whistling in the wind over here. There's been a lot of work that's been built and certain conversations that have been have occurred. So I just want to make sure we've got the whole picture that we can draw on, because again, I feel like we're quite close to ratifying a set of principles that once they're ratified, they can be amended under their own terms. But we need to start somewhere, so we've got some legitimacy to this process. We need to take advantage of what's already happened.
I wanted to bring up that just historically in the co-op, you know, we've had pretty well functioning committees that have come and gone. I think Raoul was on the executive committee. We had audit and finance committee that was run by Mark Pui very successfully for a while. But the ones that really worked and had any sticking power were ones that had a dedicated chairperson who stuck around and created agendas and regular meetings. Because if nobody shows up to these things, they pretty quickly fall apart.
Well, there have been regular meetings going now since April, and with agendas, notations, and recordings. The issue seems to be getting final documents produced and ratified by the board. So I guess I kind of want to focus on that.
I'm saying not just the documents, but you know, who's going to chair this thing is where I'm getting to.
Well,
yeah, that was discussed before you came on in. There is a process for, first of all, what the team is trying to do is get 5 members from there. Looks like 4 people raised their hand, but really to put those names to the community and then get a 5th member also. And then do the election of the chair by the committee. And then there is the separate question of VP of governance. Is that going to be the chair? Is that going to be separate? And they're going to participate in the committee, I guess, is still up in the air, because I know Greg mentioned there are a couple of people for the VP of governance role. So I don't know if they are already in the list of 4 or 5 that Rich has, or if that's a separate individual beyond that. But I think that's kind of the next thing to process. But as far as chair of the committee, the process was described just before you got here.
Okay, sorry I missed that.
But I think we have to nail this charter first before we can get to the point of filling all the seats and then getting a chair.
Yeah. Please notice that sentence I added below the names. Additional members to be added. Wait, I didn't quite say that in English. Or members removed by lazy consensus of existing members. I just felt that we should mention a process for adding and removing members. I don't know if this is the process that we want to agree on, or
you know, it's terms like lazy consensus that will not get the document approved.
Right.
You better explain that very clearly as to how that process works. It's not, everybody would have their own view of what that is.
Right. You want to be specific, I think, to stay like, if you do not appear to 4 committee meetings without, you know, good excuse, an accepted excuse by the other members, then you're removed. Something like that.
So we're running a bit past our time. I'm glad that that we've got some clarification on the history of these documents. I think that's helpful. There was a proposal to try to get to a finalized draft by the next working group meeting next Thursday at 3 p.m. Pacific. What I also, there had been some movement earlier to get a kind of a chat group out of Discord. And I guess I'd suggest that everybody attending now join that so that we can start sharing the documents and just all of us commit to reading. I think at this point we should read this and comment on this charter as well as GP 001, because these are the documents that are familiar to the board and have some history with the board. I'm willing to commit to that. Or is everyone on the call willing to commit to that?
Yes.
Run down the list.
Yes, I am. And I think that, well, Steve Ross Talbot's going to need to have time to review all of this before he's going to commit.
I'd say, yeah, hopefully out of either Steve or Evan, we get someone to commit to that process.
I was hoping to get Steve today. I wasn't sure about the regular time for this meeting, but it is everyone's agreed to 3 p.m. Pacific on Thursdays. Because I had told Steve that the meeting time was earlier. I didn't get to meet with him today at all, but I tried to set up the meeting. So is Thursday 3 p.m. the regular time that works for most people here?
I think that was the time this has been going on, and for me, this is fine.
It was changed to this by request of some of our, I guess, Asian members.
Because I know that this is quite late for Steve.
It is late for Steve, and that's it. He attended the one time, because it's been this way for 3 or 4 meetings. I've been holding out hope for an active member out of Australia. You know, if if Steve wants to recommend a time for next week, that's fine. Fine with me anyway. This has been the published time though for 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah.
So is that an action item? To change the time to earlier on Thursday?
We should probably, if we're doing that for Steve, we'll probably need to find out if he can and is willing to make it first.
So let's leave it as it is for now. And Bill, are you planning to be in touch with Steve?
Yeah, because I've already committed to reaching out to him.
So give him that option, and let's make that time flexible. I know that in the past, the meeting was at 9 a.m. Pacific, the governance meeting. I think that Nick was running, which is probably easier for Europeans.
It could have been, yeah. At one point, I thought it was at the same time as the debrief, the day before, which would be, I guess, 11. But that may be right.
So great. So you'll take that on, Bill, to see what Steve wants to do.
Yeah, and then who was reaching out to Rich?
I'll reach out to Evan.
Okay.
And I guess back to your point, Ian, about chair, et cetera. Yeah, I think that will come out of this process. We need to, I thought this charter was a charter that had existed, so was following its guidance for 5 to 9 members. So again, before you came on the call, the plan was to reach out through the special meeting process members. There were 102 that identified themselves. So we basically conduct some outreach to get engagement for prior to next week's meeting. So we can get comment on this charter, see what's missing, see what needs to be made explicit. and try to wrap it up with next week's meeting, or see how far we can get. But have some outreach starting now through that meeting.
So can we direct those people to the governance channel?
Correct.
Okay.
And we may as well publish the time of the meeting as it stands now. And if we change it, I mean, it's already in community calendar for 3 p.m. and
Right,
we'll update it as needed.
Yeah, and I think, Rich, you were suggesting a separate chat channel or something. Why don't we just do this in the governance channel, because people are already familiar with it?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine with me.
That might be easier for...
We've been directing, sorry.
Yeah, that may be easier for people to just find things and comment and everything else, as well as to get the additional members that that you're looking for. So,
okay, are we clear on our action items? So all of us are committing to working with these documents between now and the next meeting. So we'll see comments, and we'll also let's all of us make comments in the governance committee as we review these texts.
Do we also want to reach out to the email of those who filled out the introductions form?
I mean, I have some hesitation with that, because I'm just not sure what the conditions were for people. You know, if I'm not sure what the history is. You know, maybe a private email to them asking. I mean, does anyone have any concerns about using that email list for that purpose?
Can we repeat that? So we're going to use the email list for what?
Okay, the community has had introductions, getting to know you introductions list that I think Dan Connolly set up originally, which has about 125 members who filled out the survey. You know, they said what their skills were, what their interests, why they came to RChain. I think there's a question in there about whether they plan to be involved or not.
Yeah, so this was something, so it's not on a co-op account. So it's not like the co-op has gone collecting this information. This was Dan's action as a member. So I don't see anything wrong with members organizing and emailing each other. But if you're asking whether this should come from the co-op, that's kind of another thing.
So I'll follow that guidance. So it sounds like, Jim, we could definitely, or members could reach out to each other with that group and bring them up to date on the links to this discussion.
Yeah, you might be a little careful about representing, how you're representing yourself, as a member, or, I mean, in Dan's case, I think he was a contractor, but I mean, as a member receiving communications, I'd kind of want to know, who it's coming from. I wouldn't want, a member representing themselves and saying, that they represent the co-op in this, and that the co-op is going to be responsible with that information that's being collected.
Right. So it's
kind of on Dan how to deal with that data and how he's asking and collecting it.
I'm willing to help Jim get that outreach using that list.
Hey, Bill, do you see any Any problem with that kind of member intercommunication and data collection, that kind of thing?
Well, if we were in a corporate environment and something like that was going on, we would probably state to the employee that you need to make sure that it's clear that you're doing that completely on your own.
That disclosure.
And right. And it has no connection whatsoever with the employer.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking the same thing, just so everyone's clear and we don't have a misunderstanding. That email list goes out and
right.
people are getting spammed and they blame the co-op.
Right, and this is a good example, I think, of why this governance committee needs to come together to get formulated, so that, as I understand it, they can then put into place the processes about which other committees can be formed. And then you could have a, say, new members committee authorized by the co-op who's going to put into play this kind of project. And, as part of that would be making it sure that new member information that is gathered in this project is secure and is only, used properly and is only accessible by those who are authorized to access that information, kind of a thing. Or you put into the rules about, what sort of that information is going to be shared with others, and that you make it very, very clear to the new member, okay, this is the information that's going to be shared. These are the things that are not going to be shared. Or, you give a member a choice, but it's all going to come out in the design of that. But I think it just emphasizes the importance of this governance committee coming together, because it's precursor to putting something like this
policy,
this policy and this new member, project into action.
Yeah, were you saying, or was it someone else, about a member survey thing that the co-op is considering doing themselves?
Yeah, that's been suggested, and also at new member intake, what information should be gathered. That's also been spoken about. But that's doing a survey. That's kind of another thing. I don't know if we want to get into that at the tail end of this meeting or what.
But
yeah,
yes,
to recruit people, and was trying to do everything possible to recruit people and get a commitment. I don't know if we should be looking at there's mail there, but just to show you what we're doing in Digital Life Collective, come up with a set of roles that need to be filled by the organization, and then the people number of people needed for each role in total, and then of course how much it's filled, and I guess and then to collect the information on who's engaged, for how many hours a week, and how much of our capacity is filled for those roles, is the kind of thing that I want to get a robust organization in place at the earliest possible time, as opposed to just getting all set up and not having any oomph to go anywhere.
I feel I want to close. We made an hour commitment, so I kind of want to bring it to a close, and I want to see if I can make a suggestion for. It sounds to me like with proper disclosure, there could be a notice coming from Jim's list among members, just making it clear that it's an expression of a particular member's support for members' engagement in the governance process. That's for that list.
Draft, and whoever wants to sign it can sign it, right?
We could proceed with that to use the emails that Jim has collected. Then we also have the Discord tags of members who are interested and supported the special meeting process at Dan's call. So, and there was a phone tree based on those. So my intention would be that a message go out from those two lists, basically briefing those contacts, as well as a statement in governance, but that be the outreach to members about this governance committee charter process and where it stands, and how they can review the documentation that's occurring, so that we get as much support and sentiment and engagement by members in this process, hopefully by the next board meeting. Is there any objection to that proceeding?
No, I think that should be fine, as long as we make it clear that we're doing it as an initiative to engage the members, and it's not coming from the co-op.
So let me stipulate directly further that we'll before anything's sent, we'll achieve consensus by the disclaimer will be everyone attending this call will offer their okay on parsing that and making it clear how the message goes out. That's satisfactory? Does anyone object to that notion? Okay. I think I know who's here, who's been here. And so we'll make sure that everybody gets anything going forward. If anyone wants to help me with that, that'd be great. But I'll be trying to get this out within 24 hours.
Just tell me what to do.
All right, Jim. Thank you. All right, guys.
Yeah.
Is there any other comment before we close this session?
Yeah, I mean, we could probably stop the recording, but the topic came up yesterday, I think, about membership dues, and is it annual or reoccurring, and that kind of stuff yesterday. Who is eligible for voting in October? Since Ian is here, he's the expert on that. If you wanted to process that with him, you could turn the recording off and have that conversation as an informal conversation if you want.
Or we could decide to extend. I'd ask for an hour commitment. If people want to keep going, I'm willing to stay here a few more minutes.
Yeah, I want to get going, but I mean, I can sum up my understanding about who can vote and the eligibility. So when people join as a member, the membership agreement does say that every year you have to spend, I think, $15 worth on the co-op, which I mean should be usage fees on the platform. Since the platform is not built, we've just extended that membership. I think Evan's idea was to start the clock when the platform actually launches. So if you joined as a member 2 years ago, you're not going to be asked every year for an additional $20 because you still haven't really gotten what you paid for. You paid for the usage of the platform and the ability to collect a rebate at the end of the year. So, but the wrinkle here is on making sure that the voters are who they say they are. So we have not been accepting votes from people who don't prove who they are through doing the ID verification. And there have been quite a few people who have signed up as members and not completed that ID verification component. The board passed a resolution a few months ago saying that in order to help clarify this issue, that you're not a member until you do the ID verification. So we do have to grandfather in the several hundred, I think, members who who signed on and paid before that resolution. So those people still have the opportunity to come in and complete their ID verification and then vote. So, but yeah, they are kind of like zombie members right now in that they're counted as members. They're able to vote, but we're not going to accept any vote from them unless they finish that step of proving who they are. Is that kind of making sense?
Yeah, that helps. But there's an additional question also that came up in, which is last year we had the funds to conduct the elections, and I think we spent some money. I don't remember exactly how much, but you probably remember that number. You, Diane, and I were working on the voting technology alternatives. So the question is, this year with funds being very tight, we have the election coming up in October. What is the financial plan for conducting the voting? And if that calls for money, then are we going to ask people for annual contribution ahead of the mainnet this year? Or are we going to make budget adjustments somehow, recognizing that as a necessary expense? Or do we do voting without any expense at zero cost somehow? Those are some of the things in addition to this legality of the membership stuff that you were mentioning.
I think that, the concept, the message was from the last meeting that they're not going to, entertain charging people before the general meeting. I had suggested that we vote on a resolution to maintain active voting status, that that members participate in the co-op either by through their as specified by the use of the platform, or by paying their dues to be members in good standing that have voting privileges. If somebody paid dues way back when, they may still be entitled to some rewards when the platform goes live, but that doesn't necessarily mean they get to vote.
I have a couple of questions, actually. First, with regard to the, I think I understand that people are members but not voting members, but how is that interpreted with respect to achieving quorum for the annual meeting? That's my first question, Ian. Because I think we have 1,700 paid members, but around 1,000 KYC members for voting.
Yeah. That's about right. So
my question is, like, do we have to count the zombies? Yeah.
I think we do. So the zombies are eligible to vote. They receive the required communications, informing them that the vote is coming, and in order to participate, you have to complete your ID verification.
So that would mean that the annual meeting, I think you have to have 51%. Don't you have to have 51% of members, and you can have proxy to achieve quorum? But that number, instead of being around 500.
No. The quorum requirements for the annual meeting were reduced. I mean, there was some fear because everybody's remote, that if we didn't meet quorum for annual meeting, then what are we supposed to do? I mean, so that was changed by a board resolution like a year or so ago.
So what is the quorum?
But and is quorum based on the 1,700 or the 1,000?
So quorum for what? For special meeting? Because I think the only quorum is for special meeting. I don't remember exactly. I don't think there's a quorum requirement for the annual meeting.
Okay, I had thought that it was, maybe you're right. Maybe it was earlier bylaws, but I thought it was something like 51%. It seemed really high. And then also we had some, there were some issues about calling special meeting and which quorum was required for that. I think it's 10% of members, but I don't know if it's voting members or members.
Yeah.
I don't know whether
Yeah,
it's
I
the
think
17 or the 1,000. If
that's
we
what
don't, if we can't answer it right off, that's fine. I just wanted to clarify that.
I remember the same thing. I mean, if we required to meet quorum for the special meeting, we couldn't decide it. For the annual meeting, we couldn't decide anything. And of course, the annual meeting, everyone's informed and has an opportunity to vote. And if they abstain, that's everybody knows about the annual meeting. On the other hand, if you have a special meeting, you have to be sure that enough people are, interested enough to have a special meeting. Otherwise, you'd have a special meeting every 2 days, and the quorum applies in that case.
So Ian, could we just put a pin in that and maybe you get back to maybe sometime between now and the next meeting, just determine which of those parameters applies to achieving quorum under the bylaws in both cases, special meeting and annual meeting?
So you want me to go through the bylaws and find the resolution that removed the quorum requirement for the annual meeting? Because the special meeting,
It's just where it's referred to members, a percentage of members, whether it's voting qualified members or members pending their qualification.
No, I'm sorry. First, I need to get going, but okay. I'm getting kind of tired of this. The eligibility thing is all members can vote. In order to be a member, anyone past, I think, something like January 1st had to show the ID in order to become a member. Before the beginning of the year, there were some people who became members and had not completed their ID verification, but they are still considered members, and they're still absolutely eligible to vote and should be included in any quorums. But if they're but in order to vote, so that we know where the vote is coming from, we do have an ID requirement for voting. So they are eligible. Let's not say the wording there.
But I just want to clarify. I think the zombie members that Ian is referring to is a much smaller number than what you're thinking, Rich. It's not the 600 or 700. It's only the 100 people that were before the resolution. So the zombie members from Ian's definition is a much smaller number than the 700 that have not done the KYC.
It is pretty considerable. I mean, it's a few hundred, and it does matter when you're trying to get a special meeting together, and that's why it's been so contentious.
I think we can let this go. Ian, I still have specific questions about the way that membership is handled and the annual dues. And so I'll write these up and put them in the governance channel.
All right. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then there's the question of finance. If we can somehow make the election zero cost, I guess the finance issues will go away. If not, we need to think about, is there a finance issue for the election, for the October election? And maybe it can be funded from what is there now. But
all right, thank you for your time. I think we've clarified our action, and we will meet next Thursday. Stand by for the time to be adjusted, but if there's no adjustment, it'll be 3 p.m. Pacific time, and we'll be in touch, communicating in the governance channel till then. Thank you, Gary, for keeping track, and thank you, Jim, for recording.
Thanks, everybody.
all right,
Bye-bye.
see you later. Bye.
See ya.
Thanks.